Jinkies. That was not good. I had a couple friends of mine see this movie before I did, and they all hated it, and I'd already seen a lot of the buzz online about it not being very good, and I just thought to myself that it couldn't possibly be as bad as people were saying. But, hooey! It's really just not good. It's a shockingly confusing fumble of a sequel. Like, the most fun I had going to see the new Joker movie was in the car ride to and from it, because I was listening to Warhammer 40k lore on the Horus Heresy, and just listening to that was better than seeing Joker Folie Deux. Fair warning, I'm going to be getting into the nitty-gritty. I will be dumping spoilers on ya out the wazoo for this film, just to give you my full thoughts on all of it. It is confusing how badly this movie missed the mark. Like, I know sequels are never really going to be as good as the original. That's always such a tall order. Like, that is an almost impossible Herculean task. But this one is way off. Like, it is just not close. And I wasn't surprised that there's so many musical numbers in it. That was well established a long time ago, that this was going to be like a pseudo-musical to a certain extent. I'm not a fan of musicals in any way, shape, or form, really. There's a few of them I like, but overall, it's not one of my favorites. But I was willing to go in with an open mind if it was a good movie and if the musical numbers somehow added to it, but they don't. The music's fine. Like, I don't think the music is bad or anything, but the musical numbers actually just feel like filler content to try and distract you from how choppy and clusterfucky the movie itself is. Like, it feels like they were a big afterthought that they needed to just start inserting to fill space. Because this isn't a sequel that was planned. The Joker movie was supposed to be a one-off, but it made so much money that they came back for a sequel. And it really does feel like a soulless cash grab. It doesn't have a story to tell. It doesn't have a point. There's some cool scenes, and a couple of the musical sequences have some really impressive visuals, but they don't add anything, and a lot of the musical numbers don't even tie into the scene that preceded them. They're totally isolated in Arthur's head, like in his fantasy, and they don't actually even relate to anything narratively, so it just feels kind of worthless. Not all of them, but I'd say probably the majority of them don't actually even relate to what's happening plot-wise. They just are a random musical number. Some of them do relate and they're okay, like they're not awful, but I just think it would have been more effective if they just talked instead of sang at each other. That happens a lot. So like Arthur will be mid-conversation with somebody and then he'll just like break out into song. And I come and I cry and I look in the mirror and I say, who is that guy? Because society is seeming on the brink, and when I sleep with an itchy ass, my finger will stink. And it's like, what the fuck is this? Like, it becomes unbearable how often that happens in this movie. By the 8th or 9th musical sequence like that, I got up to go take a tinkle break, and I heavily contemplated just going home. I don't want to exaggerate and say this is like the worst movie I've ever seen, because it's not. It's not even the worst movie of the year, not even close. That honor still goes to Borderlands movie. It's also not the worst sequel ever made, but it is probably the most disappointing sequel I've seen. It just doesn't have a point. And these musical numbers just feel like bloat to try and take your attention away from how weak the story is. This isn't really a Joker movie, it's more of like a Harley Quinn origin story, which would have been fine if it was good. It's just not. It also feels like Todd Phillips has regret and isn't proud of the first movie, because a lot of what happens in this movie is undoing a lot of what the first one did. So the Joker's not even really in this movie. I'm just going to tell you right now, it's mainly Arthur Fleck just being sad. Like Arthur Fleck going through bad things. He is completely regressed into just the old Arthur Fleck, who doesn't have that Joker persona anymore and that like confidence or anything. But I do want to be clear, I still think Joaquin Phoenix does an incredible job with this character. I just think the writing around him was significantly weaker on this rodeo. Lady Gaga, I also think does a really good job as Harley Quinn, but it's just really frustrating how it feels like they just ham-fisted musical numbers in here because Lady Gaga is such a good singer. So pretty much every scene she's in, she's singing. Like, I don't think she really got a chance to shine and show, like, her acting prowess, and I think she's a great actress. Instead, she just is forced to just sing every time she's on screen. So I think that just takes away from the character as well. But anyway, the Joker is not really a character in this movie. Even when he's in the makeup and trying to puff out his chest and put on the act of being the Joker, it is unrecognizable from how it was in the first movie. It feels so forced, and in this movie, the Joker's just kind of a fucking moron. Like, he's actually just kind of an idiot. So, a big component of this is him going to trial. And you've seen the trailers, I'm sure. He ends up representing himself. And I thought that was going to be the turning point where most of the movie had been back and forth on Arthur and Joker. Harley is obsessed with Joker, not Arthur. She doesn't care about Arthur that much. It's the Joker that she loves. And when that happens and he fires his lawyer in the middle of the courtroom, I thought it was going to be like, oh, he's going to go into that Joker we saw at the end of the first movie. He doesn't. And really, the entire courtroom drama section of this movie, which is a huge piece of it, is just so flat. Because it's a complete steamroll. Like, we saw everything that happened in the first Joker movie, but a good chunk of this trial is them just telling you what all of us already saw from the first movie. So it just becomes kind of wasteful. The only good moment of the trial is when Gary takes the stand. That back and forth between Gary and the Joker is by far the best part of this whole movie. And it doesn't last that long. Everything else in the courtroom is just really underwhelming. There's nothing the Joker or Arthur or his team can really do to get him out of that situation, so you're just seeing him get fucking slapped by the consequences of his actions, which could have been fine. Like, I think that's a fine narrative point to go down, but there needed to be something in there to make it worth watching, because basically what we're getting is like a lore dump, a recap of what we've already seen. And even when Arthur tries to slip into the Joker in the courtroom, it just doesn't work, in my opinion. Like, he doesn't make any arguments. He doesn't even, like, try and defend himself or make some kind of statement or anything at all. He just talks in a circle, ineffectively. And then he imagines himself killing some people, but that's it. Like, it just doesn't work. I didn't think it worked at all when he tried to be the Joker here. Especially when you consider that a good chunk of this film is dedicated to try and get the audience to buy into the idea that Arthur and the Joker are separate, like it's a split personality. Like, that's his defense's argument that they try and make to help him out in court. And they really try and make you buy into that idea. They even have like an animation that plays at the beginning of the movie, and that video is supposed to try and, like, I don't know, kind of push you down that thought process. But that is so stupid. That doesn't work at all because you've seen the first movie. Like, you've already seen the first movie. Why are we even trying that? It wasn't executed very well. Like, that whole idea of trying to separate these two, it just doesn't work. It's pretty poorly done. I will say the thing that I thought had the most promise was Harley Quinn. Since a lot of this is basically her origin story, they did set up some interesting ideas. Like how she's kind of just manipulating the Joker. Like, she lies to him a lot in order to get close to him and kind of goad him in certain directions, because that's what she fell in love with, was the Joker and, like, the idea of the Joker. So she's constantly, like, manipulating him, and it's, I think, could have been an interesting dynamic if it wasn't always just in sing-song fashion, and if it wasn't always just, like, hammered home what she's doing towards the end. And the ending of this movie super sucks. The ending of this movie is, like, actually atrocious. So the courtroom drama is starting to wrap up. He's clearly not winning. He eventually then goes to the jury and starts talking about how, you know, the Joker's not real. It was never real. It's always been Arthur. Which is like that big moment, like, oh, he's been faking it this whole time. There is no, like, second, you know, personality or anything. The Joker's, it's a complete fucking ruse. It's a sham. It's always just Arthur. And while this is going on, a bomb goes off at the courthouse. That's that came out of nowhere. This whole movie doesn't have any, like, action per se. There's a couple things that happen in a fantasy where, like, the Joker gets shot or the Joker hits the judge with a gavel. Like, that all happens in a fantasy, but in the actual reality of the film, nothing like that happens at all. So this bomb explosion comes out of fucking nowhere, like a jump scare. So bomb blows up in the courthouse. Joker escapes. He just walks right out, and he's going to Harley, who doesn't really want to see him, because after what Joker said about the Joker's not real, it's only Arthur, she storms out of the courtroom. And she doesn't return his call. He starts fucking singing to her over voicemail for the millionth time, just another goddamn song, and she ignores it. He leaves the courthouse. He gets picked up by some, like, Joker super fans who get him, put him in the car, and then he runs away from them to try and find Harley. Before he gets out of their car, though, there's statements made by the two people in Joker makeup about how, like, the whole city's gonna burn, this and that. And it seems like Arthur Fleck has like regret and doesn't agree with that. He gets out of the car and starts running. And I think that moment, and he's also getting chased by the Joker's like, we still love you, we love you, Joker. And I think that's a moment that's supposed to be, it's very on the nose, supposed to be for the audience to be like, oh, people are relating to the most extreme, unhinged parts of the Joker and using it as a platform for violence type thing. And Arthur is running away from that, trying to find Harley to start a life of love with her. When he finally finds her on the iconic staircase, she wants nothing to do with him. She tells him that it's all just a fantasy. It's always been the Joker that she loves, not Arthur, and he threw away that fantasy, so the Joker's not real. It's only Arthur, and she leaves. It's all just a fantasy. Get the fuck out of here, Buster. Then he gets taken back into jail, thrown back in Arkham, and then he gets told he has a visitor, walks down a hallway, and this random dude who we'd only seen a couple of glimpses of throughout the movie, like looking on like menacingly throughout the film occasionally, talks to him in the hallway asking if he can tell him a joke. And he's like, all right, yeah, if it's a quick joke. And he's like, I'll make it quick. And the joke basically just ends with him saying, gets what he deserves, and then shanks him like 5 or 6 times, and the Joker dies. Arthur Fleck collapses and dies. And in the background, it's blurred to make it really mysterious and very cinematic. The guy who stabbed him, this random fucking psychopath, is now cutting his face in the shape of a smile. And it's, I believe, alluding to Heath Ledger's Joker, who had the scars in the shape of a smile. And if that is the case, I am pretty sure that's what it's trying to do there. If that is what it's actually aiming for, that is just insultingly shit. That, it doesn't fit at all. Like, you can start picking apart, like, the timeline till the cows come home, but even the context of this film, it just doesn't fucking fit at all. It is a terrible conclusion. Even setting aside the absurdity of this alluding to Heath Ledger's Joker, how this psychopath is now going to take on the mantle of the Joker and be what we saw in The Dark Knight, even setting aside the lunacy of that, this movie actually just goes nowhere. It ends in the exact same place it started without really much changing, and he just dies in a hallway to a random guy. There is no comeuppance for some bad people in this film. For example, the guards. Towards the end of the movie, there is a scene where the guards snap on Arthur after seeing him in the courtroom. They assault him, brutalize him, and there's an implied rape of Arthur by the guards. And the guards just kind of tip their hat to him at the end. That's it. They don't get any, like, punishment for that or anything. Which just, that's not a satisfying conclusion. Arthur is a bad guy. The Joker is a villain. But I don't think, like, it's necessarily the right call to have other villains beat him up, rape him, and those villains are fine at the end of the movie. Like, there should have been a moment where the Joker comes out and he kills those guards for that, or something to that effect. Like, it's just, this movie, it really feels like Todd Phillips hated the character he made, so wanted to unmake the character, like, as best he could. It's just so weird, the direction this movie goes. And beforehand, I know Todd tried to say that he believed music was like an integral part to exploring Arthur as like the complex character. I'm calling baloney on that. That's some fiddlesticks. No shot, because the music doesn't really explore him. The music doesn't really explore anything. It feels like it's here because Lady Gaga is here, and she's so good at singing. The music, like I said, only sometimes even connects to what we're even seeing in the plot. Other times it's just totally isolated. Like, yes, it is a look inside of Arthur's psyche occasionally, but it doesn't contribute anything. It doesn't help with the understanding of the character or how Arthur sees himself, really, outside of like a couple of isolated instances of these sequences. Otherwise, they're just musicals for the sake of it. And it just feels worthless. It's just so odd to take it in that direction. What I truly believed happened here is Todd Phillips made a great movie with the Joker one. That movie was incredible. I liked it a lot. Most people liked it a lot. It's a very well done film. And that movie made significantly more money than Todd and the executives were expecting. So he got that call, offered a big check, and said, fuck it. Fine. I'll phone in a sequel. And he did. But instead of just doing what most people do for an uninspired sequel where they kind of just repeat what the first one did a little worse for the second, He took it in the most unconventional route ever just to be quirky. Like, he took it in this completely different direction and did it terribly. Again, it's not like the worst movie I've ever seen, it's not even the worst sequel I've ever seen, but it is the most confusing one because there's no reason for it to exist. A, it's there just because money, a lot of money from the first one, we need the second one to hopefully get even more money from those piggy banks. And B, why in the fuck does it seem to have such a grudge against the first movie? Like I said multiple times now, it actually just feels like they took that character and broke it. Like, actually just, like, completely shat on what they built up for this character in the first movie. Instead of expanding on it, growing it, or even exploring it in a different way, they just redid it and wiped their ass with most of what they tried to establish in the first. It just doesn't make sense. And even when it has, like, an interesting idea or two, like, there were a couple moments in this film where I was like, oh, this is building up to something that could be cool. And then it goes to an unrelated musical number, kills its own momentum, comes back, and it's in a totally different spot. The movie's just choppy. Like, it is just choppy. So even when they have something that's starting to develop, it ruins it with a musical and then never comes back to that momentum it was building. So, like, it just doesn't work very well. There's a couple of things to like about it, like with the performances of some of the actors here for sure. There are some very cool visual moments. Like I said, in the courtroom with Gary and Arthur, that is a very strong scene. Like, that whole sequence is very powerful. But outside of, like, these very rare instances of this film, there's just not a whole lot to like. So yeah, I don't really give number reviews to things anymore. I always just answer the question, is it worth watching? And for Joker Folie Adieu, Joker 2, no. I don't think it's worth watching. It actually just feels like a waste of time. It feels like this is a film that has no reason to exist. It never wanted to exist, but had to because of money. So I don't think it's worth watching. And that's disappointing. It's really about it. So yeah. Madame Web is a movie a lot of people wrote off pretty quickly. The trailers are abominable. Let's not, beat around the bush here. And the press tour that Dakota Johnson went on, who was the lead for this film, was a real head-scratcher because she just openly seemed to despise the film with the way she talked about it. One of her interviews, she's like, yeah, I don't even know if the movie's good. And spoiler alert, turns out it wasn't. So maybe she really can see the future, because she knew this one was a super stinker. This movie is a straight-up clunker. And this film was produced by some of the best in the business, Matt Sazama and Burke Sharpless. Those might not be household names, but I promise you're familiar with their work. Their resume is nothing but heaters. Dracula Untold, Last Witch Hunter, Gods of Egypt, Power Rangers, Morbius, and Madame Web. They are, without any exaggeration, undoubtedly the Kobe Bryant and Shaq of producing dog shit movies. They only write horrible garbage, and somehow they keep getting worse. Now, I wouldn't say this film is worse than Morbius, but I would say it's just as bad. It's not better, it is just exactly the same as Morbius in terms of how dog shitty it is. So it's really impressive that throughout this decade of Matt Sazama and Burke Sharpless working in Hollywood, they have somehow found a way to start awful and find new ways of getting worse at it, and then accidentally making the Power Rangers movie that was at least pretty decent. I didn't hate that one. But everything else, everyone hates for the most part. But anyway, with that out of the way, let's talk about Madame Web here. So, I'm not clairvoyant, but I think everyone's going to dislike this one because there's almost nothing to like about it. The actors and actresses in here, they really don't seem to try very hard at all, save for a couple of scenes, which I think probably were some of the first scenes that were shot when the script was different. As I understand it, this script went through a lot of changes from when Dakota signed on to what eventually got puked out onto the big screen here. So I think some of the good scenes where like the performances are actually giving a shit about what's going on were probably from the original shoots before everything got cattywampus and ruined somewhere along this messy journey. But for the most part, you're not even really watching superheroes versus supervillains. You're watching zombies kind of just speak at each other occasionally. It's like you're watching performances from people that are sleepwalking through their lines. There's really no true effort. And it's clear from the very beginning of this film. I wrote notes in the beginning because I couldn't believe what I was watching, and then at some point I got hypnotized and stopped writing notes, and then at the very end, after everything had happened, the dust started to settle as it was like wrapping itself up in the last 2 minutes. I just instantly fell asleep. Like, I didn't even feel myself getting tired. My eyes just closed and I was out for like 3 minutes until Aaron, who went with me, was like, Charlie, you're sleeping. I was like, oh my God. I didn't even know. Like, my body shut down from like how confused I was that this movie even got made in the state that it's in. But anyway, very opening. This is in the trailer, that meme. He was with my mother when she was studying spiders right before she died or whatever. That line's not in there just like that, but it is in there in the same essence, just broken up. So from the very beginning, that bad guy Ezekiel's line is, I agreed to be your bodyguard because I thought you were close to finding the spider that can give us the superpowers if we can use its abilities. And I think I was paraphrasing because that was a few lines. She interrupted him at some point. But his first line is, I agreed to be your bodyguard because you told me you were close to finding the spider that's going to give us superpowers or something to that effect. And she's like, it's a very elusive spider because it's so powerful and gives all of these superpowers. Like, there's no dialogue in this movie that would ever be something a single human being would say to another in the real world. It is baffling that anyone signed off on it. Because these aren't characters, they're just plot point vessels and nothing else. No character here has any personality whatsoever, especially not the 3 spider women that Madam Web is protecting. They don't get any fleshing out whatsoever. They're basically just 3 characters that need to be saved just because, and that's it. There's no real reason for it. And Madam Web is a very interesting case study here because she's a paramedic, thus her whole career is saving people, yet when it comes to saving these 3 spider women, she tries her best to just dump them off onto their parents, which is basically just a death sentence because they're being hunted by evil spider guy. So, like, I don't know what she thought would happen there. Like, the parents just hit spider guy with a frying pan to defeat him or something. But she does not want any part of this responsibility at all, even though her career is fucking saving people. She wants nothing to do with actually saving them and reluctantly does so. But I'm jumping all around now, too. I'm so scatterbrained with how bafflingly bad this movie was. So anyway, like, even from the very beginning, it was clear that this dialogue was going to be terrible. But it somehow finds a way to get even worse than you'd ever expect it to be. But anyway, so after the mother finds the spider, she takes it to the camp and Ezekiel betrays her. He shoots 2 of the people. The mom goes, oh, jeepers, creepers, zoinks. What are you doing? And she says, I don't understand why. And then goes on to explain that this spider, if we can use its properties, can help people. And that's when Ezekiel, the main bad guy, gets his only amount of, even an iota of an attempt to give him a background story or any motivation or whatever at all. He says, not interested in helping people because no one helped me and my family when we were starving. And then he shoots her. That's all we ever get about him as a character. After that, he becomes bent on just killing the 3 spider women because he can't stop having nightmares about them killing him as like a prophecy that's going to happen in the future. We get nothing else about that guy at all. He is actually just cartoonishly evil beyond that. Nothing else. And he also fucking sucks at being a supervillain because he has like these superhuman abilities, but all he does is walk menacingly and crawl on the walls sometimes, and that's it. He at no point ever really seemed like a threat at all. Even for a second. There wasn't a single scene where I was like, oh shit, he's here. This is gonna be a tough one. Also, he can like poison people by like holding onto them, like gripping them tight. But other than his cheese touch and like the ability to crawl on walls, he doesn't really do much else as a supervillain, except whine. But anyway, I actually pretty much summed up the entire narrative here. The only thing I left out is how Cassie was born. So after the mother gets shot, it turns out she was pregnant, and the locals that were using the spider's venom for superpowers picked up the mother and then delivered the baby for her after letting a spider bite her, which of course gave Cassie powers, which didn't awaken until that accident that is now in the iconic viral clip that's gone around where, as a paramedic, she tries to save somebody and then the car ends up hitting the water and she bumps her head and now she can see the future, kinda. So, that's the origin of her power, and the narrative is she can see the future, and at one point she sees these 3 girls get killed by a spider guy, and he's a bad guy. She doesn't like bad guys, so she tries to save the girls from him. And then she's just on the run the entire time. And the spider guy wants to kill them because he doesn't want them to kill him. It doesn't get any deeper than that, really. It's very surface level shit, and that's kind of the entire narrative in a nutshell, with tons and tons and tons of awful scenes that make no sense at all. But I'm not even gonna bother breaking those down for you, because who gives a fuck? They didn't give a fuck when making it, so why should you, the audience member? I will say though, this film, for being a superhero film, has no action at all. In fact, none of the superheroes even fight the bad guy. And they don't even wear a costume or anything at all until the very, last scene of the movie. The only thing you get for, a superhero showdown is in Spider-Guy's visions, where he sees the 3 Spider-Women, beat him up and then toss him out of a window. And that's a 30-second scene. After that, they never actually fight him at all. What happens is, when he shows up, Cassie hits him with a taxi cab at one point, and then that stuns him. And then he shows up again 30 minutes later, and then Cassie hits him with an ambulance, which stuns him. That's the extent of their fighting. The climactic final showdown, he basically beats himself. So Cassie's using her visions of the future and kind of positioning him where he needs to be for the environment to take care of him, because, the environment's going up in flames. They did set up some traps to a certain extent, and they kind of give him obstacles to go through, but it's not really fighting him. It's kind of like Amnesia when you're running away from the monster, basically. That's how their fights go with the evil villain, until eventually the environment beats him, and then he gets crushed by a giant sign. It sucks. It sucks. This isn't a superhero movie or anything at all. This is a fucking slop fest, is what it is. It's not entertaining. Morbius, I would actually argue, was more entertaining than Madame Web, and that is saying something. But again, I don't think Madame Web is necessarily worse than Morbius. I still think they're about equal in terms of their shittiness. Another thing that's painfully obvious is that this movie did its absolute best to erase any and all mention of Spider-Man or anything in that universe whatsoever, and tried to keep all of that as minimal as possible, and you could actually feel some cuts where things were just scrubbed. So I truly believe the original vision for this film was something entirely different, and what we got is just a mess. And I'd like to give you a scene that I think perfectly encapsulates just how much effort went into this movie, how much thought went into this movie at the end of the day. So while the 3 girls are hiding from Spider-Guy, and I should explain, Spider-Guy fucked an NSA woman and got her passcode to all of the cameras across the globe, so that way he could track down the 3 girls from his nightmares. So he uses that technology to basically transfer his mind's eye image of these 3 women and get them in the real world, and he used the NSA computers to access all the cameras to real-time find them with his assistant. So that's how he's able to keep finding them. And Cassie and the gang knew that. They knew they needed to avoid cameras, and they eventually decided to go with Ben, who's Cassie's friend, and keep the 3 girls there while Cassie's doing some research of her own. And that's working really well. The 3 girls are at Ben's place. Spider-Guy can't find them, and that's all, great stuff. And then the woman staying with Ben has her water break, and she's about to give birth. So now they're rushing to get her to the hospital. And by they, I mean the entire kit and caboodle. The entire group, for some reason, decides to accompany Ben and the woman to the hospital. So all 3 girls now get in a car and take off down public roads and immediately get picked up by cameras, because fucking obviously they would. Why were they going with them to the hospital? I have no idea. They could have just stayed at the house, because that was clearly working. And I don't know if I didn't hear the reason why they went with them, or if they just didn't even bother because they didn't think anyone would be awake long enough to even get to that scene. I don't know. But they could have just stayed at the house and been completely safe and avoided conflict with Spider-Guy if they had just stayed there. Which would have been the logical thing too, because why does Ben want these 3 teenage girls accompanying them to the hospital in the first place for the birth here? There's no logic to it. Why would you just fucking stay there? Just stay there and wait. But anyway, they don't. That's just an example of how little thought even really went into the movie. I just don't see what the point of making it even was anymore. It doesn't tie into anything Spider-Verse related. It doesn't want to. It really doesn't want to. And it doesn't really want to try to stand on its own two legs either, so why make it? I don't get it. It's just another blemish on the record of this screenwriting duo that keeps making trash. I like, after seeing it, I'm just kind of at a loss for words for what they expected the response to this one to be, because I really can't imagine anyone sitting down and enjoying it. The biggest sin this movie commits is that it's boring. It's really boring. If you're going to a superhero film, there's at least a couple of things you expect, like the basics of having fights at the bare minimum. Morbius, for all of its flaws, had fights. This doesn't even have that. There's none of that. It's just the worst dialogue ever, constantly, and nothing more. And somehow, even with all of this dialogue, you still learn nothing about the characters. They're still so bland because they don't even give them depth or try to. It's just constantly either saying not good jokes or just saying a whole bunch of fucking nothing to begin with. So anyway, to sum it all up, Madam Web, not good. Boo. Pretty stinky. If I was to plug it into the moist meter, I'd give Madam Web a 15%, I would say. But yeah, I wouldn't even call it like a fun bad movie. It was just bad. I don't know if this one's going to pop off with memes like Morbius did, because there's really nothing memeable about it other than really bad dialogue and nothing else. It's, yeah. But we'll see. Anyway, that's about it. So yeah. I actually got you with a classic prank. I wanted to mention one more thing. By the end of the film, Cassie finally, figures out how her powers work really well, and she immediately uses it to be annoying. So, at the end of the film, she ends up going blind to match her comic book counterpart, and she immediately starts seeing the future for everything. And the way she applies this is the three girls come over with some takeout food, and she's like, "Oh, thanks for the..." and then lists the takeout food, and they're like, "How did you know that?" And she just smiles, "I saw it." And then she says, "Bless you," to one of them, and she goes, "What do you mean, bless you?" Achoo! Predicting her sneeze. So she's using it just to be annoying. That's so hype. I mean, amazing. I just had to mention that. Okay, now that's it. So yeah. This is embarrassing for me to admit, but I haven't watched the Nicolas Cage movie in years. I pride myself on being a virtuoso of rotten dog shit bad movies, and Nicolas Cage is like the Jesus Christ of terrible movies. And I haven't indulged in any of his fine cinematic masterpieces in way too long. And I watched a video from Elvis the Alien the other day where he reviews a movie called Between Worlds, which is a Nicolas Cage-fronted hemorrhoid, and I thought that looked extraordinary. So I decided to sit down and watch it myself today, and this is probably one of the best so bad it's good movies I've seen in quite some time. So I figured we'll go through it, not exactly as thoroughly as Elvis did. He did the whole movie. I'm just going to focus on my favorite parts and what makes this movie so goddamn special. So please join me on this adventure as we travel through space, time, and Nicolas Cage's flaccid cock flopping around. This movie does have a lot of Nicolas Cage having sex with a lot of titties and rock and roll, so I'm going to have to censor a good bit of it, unfortunately. Shots of the film so you know you're in for a treat. It opens with a man's ass crack and slowly panning up the crack like they're reverse swiping a credit card through it, and then we see Nicolas Cage wandering in here looking like he just stepped out of a time machine. So Nicolas Cage plays a truck driver, but a badass truck driver. A truck driver who looks like he could be a biker. And throughout the film you'll notice that it looks like Nicolas Cage has covered himself in grease and hair gel. Like every ounce of his body seems to be mildly damp, as if he's fallen into a pit of Vaseline, and the director just said, fuck it, it doesn't matter, we don't have time to clean him, we'll just film the whole thing today while he's covered in this kind of thin layer of filth. Why don't you wrestle a man-gator? I don't know what that means, but shit, it sounds scary. I mean, if someone tells me to wrestle a man-gator, I'm saying, fuck no. That's like some Batman Arkham Knight shit with Man-Bat or something. I don't know what the man-gator is. Sounds like some type of cryptozoology myth, like the Loch Ness Monster. Like, oh god, the man-gator's real, he just came in and fucked my grandpa. Tell the papers. I don't know what the fuck a man-gator is, but he really showed that guy. Nicolas Cage busting shit in to save the woman and beat a man who was hurting her, and then scaring him and putting the fear of God in him by bringing up the legendary man-gator.
What did you do?
I saved you.
Honestly, a pretty dumb question from this girl right here. What did you do? I mean, he wasn't keeping it a secret. He did it right in front of you. You saw with your own eyes. He punched and then kicked the man. I'm no detective, and I was able to sniff out what happened here. It's always such a delight to hear the word Buster tossed around when someone calls somebody else Buster. I've never heard it used towards a woman, but he just follows her around. Hey, Buster, gonna need you to stick around and tell the state troopers what just happened here. Don't know how the state troopers are coming, nobody called them, but I'm guessing the state troopers just have a fucking sixth sense where they can just detect when somebody was beaten in a gas station bathroom across the country. Couldn't tell ya, but Buster needs to stick around here to make sure that Nicolas Cage doesn't get framed for something bad. One of the best moments I've seen in a Nicolas Cage movie. What a bait and switch, huh? Do you have kids? Do I have kids? What about a family? Do you like my family? Yeah, they're fucking dead! You goddamn idiot! What, you couldn't tell that they were dead by the picture? Like, immediately they're trying to establish that Nicolas Cage is a fucking weirdo. But for no reason, because the rest of the movie, his weirdness isn't like a key component of anything. He's just fucking psychotic and odd for the sake of being some kind of strange weirdo that parents would warn their kids to stay in school to avoid becoming. Escaped Arkham Asylum by saying, oops, his family's dead. She asks him to give her a ride to the hospital where her 18-year-old daughter was recently in an accident and is just coming out of a coma. Now, I can't understand at all why the fuck she would ask this madman to give her a ride when she was getting in her own vehicle to drive herself there. He literally ripped her out of her own car in order to call her a buster again and talk about what had happened. So she had her way of getting to the hospital herself, but for some reason insisted that this total fucking lunatic stranger at the gas station, who probably smells like 15 bags of Doritos that were mixed in with raw sewage, give her a ride to the hospital instead. Makes sense.
When I was a teenager, I almost...
Yeah, so I'll go ahead and cut this X-Men origin story in half here and sum it up. After giving her a ride, or during the ride, she explains to Nicolas Cage that her superpower is when she's being strangled and on the verge of death, she can bring souls into their bodies again, because she almost drowned when she was a kid. So now she has this ability to take souls from the spirit realm and bring them into their bodies again, but only if she's being strangled to the point of near death.
Giddy up.
I'd love to see what the script of this disaster looks like. Like, what the fuck is the point? Okay, so, like I said, I'm only covering, like, the best moments that I really like in the movie. To kind of fill in the blanks here and connect the dots for you, Billy gets to leave the hospital. They bring her to Julie and Nicolas Cage's house here. Nicolas Cage doesn't live here. He's just staying with Julie for a little while because she's starting to feel for him. And now Billy's here. She has all kinds of medicine and shit. And for some reason, Nicolas Cage just takes a swig while he's hugging Julie, which plays no role in anything. He just does it because he's a fucking lunatic. Like, I'm surprised he didn't just put it up his fucking butthole right in front of her and then say, giddy up and slap himself and the fucking medicine squirts out or something. It's, like, everything he does and everything he says is just fucking weird. Like, the whole daddy tight. But it's weird for no reason. Typically, when a movie tries to portray a character like this, it's working towards something, but I'm gonna spoil the surprise and ruin Christmas now. It's working towards nothing. He's just weird because he's a fucking weirdo. It doesn't... Alright, I'll take a moment to fill you in on what's going on with the story here, if you can even call this a story. So, in a nutshell, Nicolas Cage drives trucks. Nicolas Cage sucks at his job. He took 3 days off to hang out and fuck Julie here and help with Billy's recovery, and understandably his boss wasn't too happy about that. And he's saying, look man, can you at least give me some money that I'm owed from you not doing your job? And Nicolas Cage is upset about that. And during all of this, Billy's acting very strange towards Nicolas Cage and gives him a hand job under the covers one time. But he doesn't tell Julie, and Billy doesn't tell Julie. So now Nicolas Cage, being the suave gentleman he is getting some action from both Julie and Julie's daughter. Nicolas Cage confides in Julie about what happened to his family. His wife's cigarette lit the couch on fire, which killed his wife and his daughter in a tragic fire. and then explains why the truck means so much and that $500 needs to be paid or else he doesn't get the truck or some shit like that. So Julie goes into town to pay it for him, being the nice woman that she is, and while she's in town, Nicolas Cage fucks her daughter. But it's not actually Julie's daughter, Billy, he's fucking. It's his wife, Mary, in Billy's body because Julie made a colossal fuck up when bringing the soul back into Billy's body. Instead of bringing Billy's soul back into Billy's body, she brought Mary's soul into Billy's body because Mary has been haunting Nicolas Cage.
Oh, God, you're such a little tart. Such a little tart.
You're such a little tart. I mean, this script, it's like if Attaway General was written in collaboration with the lady who wrote 50 Shades of Grey, and both of them were overdosing on Xanax while writing it. Who the fuck would say that during sex? Oh, you're such a little tart. Ooh, a little tart. Oh, you little silly munchkin. Ooh. Like, it's just fucking odd. So yeah, now after Nicolas Cage is convinced that this is his wife Mary in Billy's body, they start fucking a lot, and he's kind of tired of Julie. After he's been caught red-handed, busted nuts and all, he starts telling her that no, that's not her daughter Billy, it's his wife Mary, and he starts pursuing her in the same way he did earlier, but this time not calling her Buster, and he has his wiener out the whole time. So, and then in his defense, she did go a little far in calling him gross because his wiener's flopping around. I think that was a little bit rude. Like, it's not like they haven't fucked 10 times in the movie already, okay? So his cock can't be that disgusting. So, you know, I could see that being a bit of a low blow, and as you can see from Nicolas Cage's reaction, he found it to be a bit rude as well. Overall, I do think the movie is so bad it's good in a lot of ways. It's fun to make fun of, but there is a lot of time in this movie that drags a lot, where there's nothing goofy happening or shitty happening. It's just actual silence, which kind of sucks, but in a way that's also kind of silly, because the silence is just out of nowhere. Like, they'll be mid-conversation, and then all of a sudden everything stops, and they just, like, fall asleep with their eyes open in front of each other. So yeah, overall, I enjoyed it, and probably one of Nicolas Cage's finest works. That's about it. So yeah. Artemis Fowl is without exaggeration the worst Disney movie I've ever seen, and that's not a statement I make lightly. There are Disney movies I think sucked fat asshole, but Artemis Fowl is a whole new beast. This thing stands atop the mountain of asshole that's been sucked and is at an unreachable level. This is the raid boss of sucked ass. It is truly terrible in every department imaginable. Nothing in this movie makes sense, nothing flows together. The movie's like 40 minutes long, it's like a fucking speed run of a movie. And by the time the movie ends, you wonder what even happened. Was there a story? Did anything even fucking occur? And if it did, why? It's just a confusing, convoluted mess of dog shit. It is an entire diaper of dog shit. It's truly horrendous, and I can't even believe that it even got put out. This should have just been scrapped. They should have flushed this down the toilet. Something Chris Stuckman mentioned in his review of this film is the teaser trailer for it was almost non-existent in the movie. All the scenes that were shot for the teaser trailer didn't exist in the final cut of the movie that's out right now. There's only like 3 scenes from the trailer that's actually in the movie. Everything else was cut at some point or just never existed in the first place. So I don't know what the fuck happened there. Maybe the movie that got published on Disney Plus is like a rough intern cut for it that they made as a joke and accidentally uploaded. I have no idea. But it is an absolute abomination, a repulsive, putrid petri dish of puke. I can't express enough how bored I was watching it, and then how incredibly confused I was around the mid-game here. So, right away the movie shows you that it's not good, and it knows it's not good. The character, the main character, the lead, Artemis Fowl, the acting is truly terrible, and I don't like saying that because it is a child actor, and I don't even think it's his fault, but there was no direction. It feels like everything that was used was the first take for him. Every single line from Artemis Fowl sounds like it's just being read right off of a script. There's no emotion behind it, there's no like facial expressions, there's no acting, it's just a stoic, neutral face with every single line. It's like in a video game when the animations aren't loading. It just feels so weird. It's like if I was reading the lines. It just sounds like a script reading, it looks like a script reading. It's just weird. I don't know why that would be the takes they'd use, because I'm sure the kid can act. He wouldn't be in a Disney movie if he's not an actor and can't actually act. So I don't know why they'd use only these emotionless moments for like emotionally heavy scenes. I don't think anyone's gonna mind, but I'll get into slight spoilers. There's a character that dies that you're supposed to care about, but none of the characters in this movie have any reason for you to care about them. They're not fleshed out. They have like no relationships with each other that make any sense. For example, one of the main characters becomes a friend of Artemis Fowl after she's been trapped in a cage by him, and then he lets her out of the cage after a while, and she's like, yeah, we can be friends now. Even though she was 3 seconds ago, the scene before, hating him, absolutely fucking hating him, but now they're friends. What I'm saying is there's no reason to care about the characters, but one of the characters is dying, and Artemis Fowl, well, he doesn't care. Or at least that's how it seems, because as the character's dying and the guy's crying, Artemis Fowl, I mean, there's nothing coming from him. He's just sitting there watching him die. He's like, man, this sucks. Bro, you're dying. Dude, this shit. Man, that's tough. You know what? I'll sing you a poem. Then he sings him a poem, all unenthusiastic and monotone, and then all of a sudden the character's not dead because there's a you know, a way to not kill the character that makes no sense, which I'm going to get into now because this entire fucking movie makes no sense. Narratively, it's a true mess of nothing. Absolutely fucking nothing. There's a main villain that kidnaps Artemis Fowl's dad, and they're only going to get his dad back if they find the Oculus, whatever the fuck, I already forgot what it was called. It's called Oculus, but they say it like Acleus or some shit. So then Artemis Fowl has to find the Acleus, and then, you know, eventually he finds the Acleus, and he gets his dad back, and the villain just goes, no! And that's the end of that. You've only have 3 scenes with the main villain. The main villain is in 3 scenes that I can remember. Maybe 4. I can't. Honestly, the whole thing just is like this fucking fever dream. It actually feels like a dream. You know, you can remember bits and pieces of what went on, but you don't know why it all made sense at the time, even though it never made sense at the time in this movie. Nothing in this movie fucking works. Things just happen. Let me give another example here. Well, first of all, there's only 2 locations in this movie. There's the mansion, and then there's the fairy universe. So they saved a lot of money on locations because the whole movie just takes place at either of those 2 locations, nowhere else. So they really saved a pretty penny on that, I imagine. That and the CGI, because the CGI is absolutely terrible. It looks like we just went back in time 20 years. This feels like a movie that would have came out like in the late 90s, maybe, as like a straight to VHS production. But that aside, the example I want to give, there's a fight on Artemis Fowl's mansion because he's got the important thing, and now the time freeze zone is collapsing. And the time freeze zone collapsing is a really big deal. While the time freeze zone is collapsing, the general of the fairies is getting overthrown by an evil fairy. And while the general's getting overthrown by the evil fairy, the general is getting in trouble because the evil fairy is taking over because he's working with the villain. And time zone's collapsing. The overthrowing guy throws a troll into the house to attack Artemis Fowl, beat the troll, time zone collapse. Now the time zone collapsing is apparently like a doomsday apocalypse scenario. Things go wild, everyone's panicking like, holy shit, this is our last chance to survive. The boy's not going to make it, Artemis Fowl is dead because the time freeze is done. And then in the next scene, after hyping it up and showing how bad it can be, Artemis Fowl and everything's fine. The mansion's fine. Nothing happened. What happens is the time freeze collapses. Artemis Fowl says, we need to find cover. So they run off screen. The next scene, they come out of cover. They're like, damn, that was close. And then right after that, the guy who just overthrew the general fairy says, you know what? You can take charge again. I'm a good guy now. With nothing connecting it at all. He just sent the fucking troll in there. Troll got beaten and now he's a good guy again and they accept him as a good guy. It makes no sense. The movie is a fucking disaster. I'm like, maybe there's things I missed because admittedly I was dozing off occasionally for like split seconds. I didn't want to miss a single fucking moment of this movie, but unfortunately it is so unbelievably boring and uninteresting that yes, I was dozing off a little bit. But that only speaks volumes to just how truly terrible it is because I never sleep through bad movies. I don't even think about it because I'm glued to an abominable piece of media. I love it. But this is on another level I didn't even think possible, especially not for Disney. It is crazily shit. It's truly terrible. Plugging this into the moist meter, Artemis Fowl is getting a wonderful 10%. And let me explain. It should be 5, but I'm going to explain why it's 10%. There is an element of this movie in being so bad that it does occasionally cross into the realm of being enjoyably bad. That is the only thing that is saving it from a 5% on the moist meter because there is some entertainment to laugh at. And that's the only positive. That's the only positive. And that's really about it. It is awful. That's it. See ya. Yeah, I saw this movie last night. I'm sure almost none of you had any interest in seeing this, but I still have to rant about it anyway. It's not a horror movie per se, but I think it kind of billed itself as one, so I went into it expecting it to be one, and I think most people are under the impression. It's one of the sillier films of the year. I don't think it's worse than Tarot. I don't think it's worse than The Strangers. But man, this was still so bad. And what's really cute is that it actually has the old lady from Tarot. So she now has an incredibly stacked 2024, where she has now been in 2 unbelievably atrocious stinkers. And that's kind of admirable. And she plays the exact same character in this movie as she did in Tarot for the most part. The premise is cool. So I actually like the premise. The premise is basically Dakota Fanning, she finds herself in the forest after a pet delivery gone wrong. And she stumbles upon this weird building with these 3 strangers in there. And every night, they have to lock themselves in, and they get watched by mysterious entities on the outside that they can't see, they can only hear. And it lends itself well to some kind of cool mystery. But does anyone care about spoilers? I can't imagine anyone really gives a fuck. Like, is anyone gonna shake their fist at me like, how dare you? If I get into spoilers? Okay, most people are saying no, they don't care about spoilers. If you care about spoilers, my apologies. You can write a strongly worded letter to the manager. So, the film has a cool premise. And about halfway through the movie, probably not even halfway through the movie, they kind of just immediately show their whole ass and they tell you what the Watchers are. And you get to see the Watchers, and they're basically just like these generic tall Slendermen. And it turns out they're fairies. Like evil fairies. And then the movie dives into like actual Tumblr fanfic, where it's like, before the war, there was humans and fairies living in peaceful symbiosis. We coexisted with the fairies together, but we feared their shape-shifting abilities, how they could become us. So we ripped off their wings and we forced them underground and we locked them under a stone. And now, they can't leave this forest because we asked them not to, basically. So, what they're being watched by is fairies that study them so that way they can take their shape better. It's so fucking dumb. This is not Oh, yeah. So it's not M. Night Shyamalan, it is his daughter. This is a Shyamalan family production, basically. And in classic Shyamalan fashion, it's a cool premise that they had nothing good to do with it, past the idea, like the ideation. So let me just start breaking down some scenes for you. So, shit just happens for the sake of it happening without any explanation for why this shit is happening. So it starts off okay because the premise is fun. And then, as things start to unfold, Dakota Fanning is rebellious and she's got a dark and mysterious past. And she decides to start breaking the rules that the old woman has set. One of the rules is don't go into the burrows because that's where the Watchers come out. And she goes into the burrows with the help of this guy. I forgot his name. She goes into the burrows and she sees like bicycles and like children's toys and stuff. And then all hell breaks loose because the fairies start shape-shifting. But they know this. Like, there's no explanation given, really, like a good one, for why the fairies can't leave the forest. They could just walk out of the forest. There is an explanation given for why they can't leave, the humans here, because they're lost and they can't be out at night because the fairies hunt at night and they don't like the sun. They're like fucking vampires. So they can't leave the forest, I get that. That makes sense. But the fairies, the only explanation for why they can't leave the forest is because they were forced underground 1,000 or like fucking thousands of years ago. But they could just walk out. Like, there's no magical force field preventing that. They could just walk the fuck out and then dig a hole. Like, they're afraid of the sun, walk out during the night, dig a hole, stay there during the day, get out of the hole, walk out in the night, dig more holes. It turns out there was a professor who built this building, and who built this bunker underneath the building because he's been studying the fairies. And this was highly unnecessary to even include in there. They just wanted to make him like an evil guy. He's like, he recorded himself with this webcam. He's like, sailor's log, 2009. I started construction on the bunker. I hired locals from the town nearby for fucking 5 schmeckles an hour to build it for me. And I urged them to stay out at night so they'd get mauled and killed by the fairies. Lord, forgive me for my sin. But it's like, brother, you didn't have to do that. Like, you didn't have to just have them die. Like, that's highly inefficient, because then you have to go get more workers every single time and recycle over their dead fucking corpses. Like, you would have to walk over so many bodies for that to happen. You could have just, like, had them do the work, and then had them go home before it gets dark out, and then have them come back. Like, you didn't need that. But it's things like that. Eventually he catches a fairy, and he's, like, training it like a pet. So they're watching these videos of him training the fairy, like, learning from the fairy. And then, randomly, in his last entry, he's like, I've got to kill it. I've got no choice. I'm gonna take it behind the barn, and I'm gonna fucking shoot it in the heart. And then I'm gonna shoot myself. For no fucking reason. It's like he spent like 100 days with this fairy in a cage, and then he's just like, you know what, I'm tired of playing with this toy. I'm gonna kill it and then kill myself. So he does. Or so you think. So it turns out that fairy was actually a half fairy. Because thousands of years ago, fairies and humans used to fuck. And what happened is, they gave birth to halflings that live amongst us in secret. And that fairy that he captured was a halfling. One that could walk in the day. They called her the Daywalker. Her real name that she said was Arinthbuna or something. Arintha Rancor, Balrog, I don't remember. Something like that. But all of this is just like getting vomited at you all at once towards the end of the movie. It's just like an overwhelming amount of just nonsense. Anyway, the professor eventually in one of the recordings says, hey, I left the boat over there. You can just like go this direction, get on the boat and leave if you want. So they do. And while they're going there, keep in mind, they're fully aware that all of the fairies can change their shape into human beings. This fucking goober here, this absolute imbecile, as they're running towards the boat, he hears one of their friends in the forest and like struggling. He's like, John, help. I think his name is John. He's like, John, I need help. Please, please. And he's like, I'm coming. So he grabs the guy and turns out it's not John. So then he dies. And they take his shape. And then they sail into the town. And then, big plot twist, the old lady was a fairy the whole time. She was the halfling the professor kept as a pet. Because it turns out the professor had a wife. And the wife died. And the professor tried to train a halfling, or tried to train a fairy to shapeshift into his wife so he could keep fucking her. And that's who this is the whole time. It was a fairy. So like his whole thing was like, their shapeshifting abilities can bring anyone back from the dead. Which they can't. It's not resurrecting the dead. It's literally just cosplaying as the dead. It's LARPing as a dead person. So him having this galaxy brain scheme of bringing his wife back never had any water to it, like no salt, because his wife is still dead. You're then just, you have a puppet of your wife. That's it. At that point, just get a doll, right? Like, it's stupid. His plan is stupid from the beginning. And then she's mad because fairies hate humans because of what they did, which is why the Watchers watch them and, like, kill them if they break the rules. They study them and then kill them because they're mad. 1,000 years worth of bad blood and a grudge. But when old lady is confronted by Dakota Fanning in the climactic final battle, Dakota Fanning's like, I know what it's like to not feel like you belong. Because it turns out her dark and mysterious past is she got her mom killed because they were on a road trip and she was like a little brat who rolled down the window and the mom was like, can you roll up that window? And then Dakota Fanning's like, I hate you! I hate you! I hate you! I'm not rolling down the window! I'm not rolling down the window! So the mom's like, what are you doing? Why are you freaking out? And she's like, I'm gonna roll up the window myself. So the mom starts rolling up the window and Dakota Fanning's character puts her fingers out the window and gets them crushed. And she's like, ah! And then the mom's like, what happened? And then she crashes into a car and dies. So she carries that guilt with her the entire time. And she, like, trauma dumps that towards the end. So then the halfling gets all of that information, and Dakota Fanning's like, the professor never told you? You're half human. And she's like, no! No, I can't be! I'm so conflicted! And then she, like, she's like suffering from the revelation that she's half human, half fairy, and then her wings pop out of her butt, and then she flies away, and now she's looking for more halflings. It's pretty fucking bad. It's pretty bad. But it's not nearly as bad as some of the other trash this year. But I like, there was multiple times where I did this, like I gestured this emote, because it was, they were just making things up out of nowhere with no real payoff or build up to it. They're just like, oh yeah, end this. Oh yeah, end this. Because of that. Because I said so. Should watch a bad movie in the sub Discord with everyone. That's kind of a fire idea. But yeah, I just wanted to share that because I saw this last night. I just had to relay the information. No, I really think the Shyamalan family has great ideas. This is a cool premise for a movie. What they need, what the Shyamalan family desperately needs, is somebody to flesh out their premise better than they can. That's what they need. Like, this movie could have probably slapped. Compared to Marvel movies, DC movies are basically like the fucking Tommy Wiseau of superhero movies. They're abominable, with the only exception being Wonder Woman. That's the only good DC movie so far. And no, to the 5 or 6 flaccid, cocked, semi-chubbed warriors that defend DC movies in the comment section, you can't count the Dark Knight series. That's a Nolan series. That's cheating. DC makes shitty stinkers. They're not fun to watch, they make no sense, and they're just bad movies. Suicide Squad's probably one of the worst movies I've ever seen in a movie theater, and they're just keeping this momentum going forward. Now they've released an Aquaman poster, which is probably the worst poster I've ever seen for a movie that scale, ever. It is absolutely fucking atrocious. It genuinely looks like a high school art student threw it together as some type of creative piece for class. It literally uses stock images in the fucking poster. Literal stock images. Here, look at this. It's a Getty image. It's a fucking Getty image in this poster for this massive budget DC movie. It's fucking Aquaman. Everyone knows Aquaman. You'd have to travel 15,000 miles to a tribe that's never had human contact to find someone that hasn't heard of the superhero Aquaman. And you're going to give him the filthy asshole of a Getty image on his poster? Disrespectful. It's a horrible poster. There's nothing cool about it. This pose isn't cool. It doesn't look cool. It looks like this is like something that would be hung in a SeaWorld. It's awful. It's fucking awful. I want to spend time talking about how bad this is. Like, just look at this pose. Who is this pose cool to? It's stupid. It's fucking dumb. It's laughable. What was the direction for this? Yeah, just kind of squat right there and hold the trident. Just, you know, do what Aquaman would do if he was taking a shit on top of a rock. Yeah, Jason, just go ahead and pretend you're on an invisible surfboard, but you're also trying to duck under something as well. He looks like Tiger Woods analyzing the green right before a putt. You know, maybe I'm just getting old, and maybe this is like one of the coolest fucking poses out there right now. Let me give myself a little photo shoot here and see how cool I look with this same type of shit. Fuck! Jesus. I also love how he's wearing leather pants underwater. This is like an 8-year-old's perception of what's cool. I'm surprised he's not wearing sunglasses and a leather jacket from like the fucking Hells Angels biker gang. It's so dumb and laughable. Like, what the fuck were they thinking here? This had to pass through so many different corporate layers, and artists had to okay this in a bunch of different departments before they said, yep, this looks good, this will represent our movie nicely, go ahead and post that shit. Someone in there, someone in that chain must have this sinister agenda where they know the movie's gonna be shitty, and they want people to know that right away. So maybe home is calling as the catchphrase is kind of like, yeah, maybe you should just stay at home and not go see this movie. Look at our poster. That's indicative of the quality the movie's going to be. And then for some reason, somewhere in this chain as well, someone looked at it and said, damn it, you know, there's just not enough fucking sharks in there. There's not enough going on. Okay, we can fix that. Why don't we have Harold just duplicate one of the sharks 3 times in the top left to kind of fill space? That's a brilliant idea. Good shit, do it. So now they just clone 3 sharks up there, the exact same one. Unreal. It's so lazy and awful. It's unbelievable that this is the actual official poster, and the director himself is defending it. It's not like I'm a big Aquaman fan or anything, so it's not like seeing this poster is them spitting on my childhood or anything, but man, seeing this poster is like spitting on my intelligence, though. It's like, I can clearly see There's not a whole lot of passion or a lot of talent in this poster, and you're gonna tell me that this is good shit? James is going to defend this. James, the director, I'm calling him by his first name because obviously we're close friends. He's going to defend this as like an actual good piece? You got me fucked up. How dumb do you think I am? I don't sit there and wipe my ass with my bare hand. I use toilet paper like a civilized man. I'm not gonna sit here and be fed this kind of bullshit that it's like, yeah, this is big budget shit. No, this looks like an indie movie. This looks like some type of music video still from like a Bollywood video. It's dumb. It's fucking awful. You can do better. Anyone could do better. I could probably do something better than this, and I fucking suck at photos and shit. It's really, really bad. Yeah, well, you know, needless to say, my expectations for the movie are pretty low now. As if they weren't already low enough with DC's track record, but that's the poster. Good shit. See ya.